I was 73 years old when my grandson's whisper changed everything I thought I knew about family, about loyalty, about the quiet ways we betray the people who love us most. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, when the light came through the kitchen windows like honey, thick and golden. The kind of light that makes you believe the world is still gentle. I remember because Tuesdays were always my day with little Marcus. His mother, my daughter-in-law Jennifer, would drop him off after preschool, and we'd spend the afternoon making cookies, or reading stories, or just sitting together in the garden watching the butterflies dance around my roses. He was 4 years old then, with dark curls that fell across his forehead and eyes so brown they looked almost black, like pools of coffee in the morning before you add the cream. I had raised 3 sons in that house. 3 boys who'd climbed those same trees in the backyard, who'd scraped their knees on that same porch, who'd sat at that same kitchen table doing homework while I cooked dinner and hummed old songs my own mother used to sing. Daniel was the oldest, then Jacob, then my youngest, Thomas, who I thought was my anchor, my steady boy, the one who called every Sunday without fail, who brought his wife and son to visit twice a week, who'd told me just a month before that I should move in with them, that I shouldn't be alone in this big old house anymore. I'd been thinking about it, actually. The house had grown too large around me, after my husband Charles passed 5 years ago. Too many empty rooms filled with memories that echoed like footsteps in an abandoned church. Too many nights when I'd wake up reaching for him in the dark, my hand finding only cold sheets and the vast emptiness of a bed meant for 2. Thomas had been so persuasive, so caring. He'd said they had plenty of room, that Marcus would love having his grandmother there every day, that Jennifer had already started fixing up the guest room. He'd held my hand when he said it, his eyes soft with concern, and I'd felt my heart swell with gratitude that at least one of my boys still needed me, still wanted me close. Daniel lived in Seattle now, too busy with his law practice and his new wife to visit more than once or twice a year. Jacob had moved to Austin after his divorce, chasing some tech startup dream that seemed to consume all his time and attention, but Thomas had stayed. Thomas had built his life just 15 minutes from mine, had given me a grandson to spoil, had woven himself into the fabric of my daily existence until I couldn't imagine my life without him in it. That Tuesday, Marcus and I had made chocolate chip cookies, the kitchen warm with the smell of butter and vanilla and melting chocolate. He'd stood on a stool beside me, his little hands sticky with dough, chattering away about his day at school, about a girl named Emma, who'd shared her animal crackers with him, about a frog they'd found in the playground. I'd listened the way grandmothers do, with my whole heart, storing away each small detail like precious stones to turn over later when I was alone. After the cookies cooled, we'd taken a plate them out to the garden. It was still beautiful then, though not as grand as it had been when Charles was alive. He'd been the real gardener, spending hours coaxing roses to bloom, training clematis up the trellis, planting bulbs each fall that would surprise us with color each spring. I'd tried to keep it up after he was gone, but my knees weren't what they used to be, and sometimes the loneliness made even the garden feel like too much effort. Still, it remained lovely in its wild way, overflowing with late summer blooms, and the kind of peaceful disorder that comes when nature takes back just a little bit of control. We sat on the old wooden bench beneath the oak tree, Marcus swinging his legs and humming between bites of cookie, and that's when I heard it, voices coming from inside the house. Thomas's voice, low and urgent, and Jennifer's, higher, strained. I'd left the kitchen window open to let in the breeze, and their words drifted out to us on the September air. I don't care, Jen. It's happening. The realtor said we could get at least $800,000 for it, maybe more. That location, that lot size, in this market, it's a gold mine. My heart stuttered in my chest. They were talking about my house, my home, the place where I'd raised my children, where I'd buried my husband's ashes beneath the roses he'd loved, where every corner held a memory so thick you could almost touch it. Jennifer's response was quieter, harder to hear. But Thomas, she hasn't even said yes to moving in yet. What if she changes her mind? What if? She won't change her mind. She's lonely, she's getting older, she can barely maintain this place anymore. Trust me, In another month she'll be begging to move in with us. And once she does, once she signs the house over to me, we can sell it, and finally enough for that lake house we've been wanting. Plus, with her living with us, she can help with Marcus full-time, free childcare. Jen, think about it. I sat very still on that bench, the half-eaten cookie turning to ash in my mouth. Marcus had gone quiet beside me, his little hand finding mine, squeezing it with surprising strength. When I looked down at him, his eyes were wide, frightened, like he could feel the world shifting beneath us the way animals sense earthquakes before they strike. "Grandma," he whispered, so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Are you going to go away?" And that whisper, that tiny, trembling question, cracked something open inside me that I didn't know could still break. I pulled him close, buried my face in his hair that smelled like strawberry shampoo and sunshine and innocence. "No, baby," I whispered back. "I'm not going anywhere." But even as I said it, I knew it was both true and a lie. I wasn't going anywhere, but I also couldn't stay, not like this, not knowing what I now knew. The voices inside had continued, planning my future like I was a chess piece to be moved around their board, discussing my life like it was something that belonged to them and not to me. I don't remember walking Marcus back inside. I don't remember the look on Thomas's face when he saw me standing in the doorway, my grandson's hand in mine, my eyes surely showing everything I'd heard. Jennifer went pale, actually pale, like someone had drained all the blood from her face. Thomas started to speak, started to explain, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, but I held up my hand and he stopped. "It's time for Marcus to go home," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. "I'm very tired." They left. What else could they do? Thomas tried to call me that night, and the next day, and the day after that. I didn't answer. I sat in my kitchen, in my house, in the home I'd built with Charles over 40 years of marriage, and I felt something harden inside me, crystallize like ice forming on a pond in winter. I'd spent my whole life giving to my children. I'd given them life, yes, but also everything that came after. I'd given them my youth, my energy, my dreams. I'd put my own career on hold to raise them, had turned down a teaching position at the university, because Daniel had been struggling in school and needed me home. I'd nursed them through illnesses, through heartbreaks, through the 1,000 small crises that make up childhood. I'd loved them with a ferocity that surprised even me, loved them until my own identity seemed to blur at the edges, until I sometimes looked in the mirror and couldn't remember who I was beyond their mother. And Charles and I had given them this house too, in ways they didn't even know. We'd taken out a second mortgage to pay for Daniel's law school. We'd depleted our savings to help Jacob buy his first condo before the market crash. We'd co-signed for Thomas's business loan, when no bank would take a chance on him. We'd given and given and given, the way parents do, never asking for anything back, because that's not why you give to your children. You give because you love them, because their happiness feels like your own happiness, because their success is the only legacy that matters. But this was different. This wasn't Thomas needing help. This was Thomas planning to take the last thing I had, the last piece of the life I'd built, and sell it for a lake house. For recreation, for convenience, for free childcare. I called Daniel that night, even though it was late, even though I knew he'd be annoyed at the interruption. I told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then he sighed, and in that sigh I heard something that hurt almost as much as Thomas's betrayal. "Mom," he said carefully, "you know you're getting older. Maybe this isn't such a bad idea. You'd be with family. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining that big house, and Marcus would." I hung up. Just pressed the button and ended the call. Something I'd never done to one of my children in my entire life. He called back immediately, but I didn't answer. I tried Jacob next, and the conversation went almost the same way, except he added that maybe Thomas had a point about the market value, that real estate was a good investment, that I should think about what was practical. Practical. As if love and memory and home could be reduced to market value and practical considerations. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through my house like a ghost, touching the walls, running my fingers along the banister, where 3 little boys had slid down on their bottoms despite my protests. standing in the doorway of each of their old rooms. Daniel's room still had his swimming trophies on the shelf. Jacob's room still had the mural of stars Charles had painted on the ceiling when Jacob went through his astronomy phase. Thomas's room still had the growth chart on the wall, the pencil marks tracking his height from age 2 to age 18. I stood in my own bedroom, the one I'd shared with Charles, and I looked at his side of the bed, still made up even though he'd been gone 5 years, and I felt him there with me in the darkness. I felt his steady presence, his quiet strength, and I knew what he would say. He'd say that our boys had forgotten something essential, something we'd tried so hard to teach them. He'd say that sometimes the people you love need you to remind them of who they're supposed to be. But he'd also say, I think, that sometimes you have to save yourself. Over the next 2 weeks, I made my arrangements quietly, methodically. I called a real estate lawyer who'd been a friend of Charles's and explained my situation. I set up a trust, ironclad and unbreakable, that would ensure my house could never be sold as long as I lived, and would pass to my grandchildren, not my children, when I died. I called a home care agency and arranged for someone to help me with the heavy housework, the gardening, the things my body struggled with now. I changed my will, not out of spite, but out of clarity, dividing things more carefully, more thoughtfully, ensuring that the boys would inherit what they'd earned with their love, not what they could extract with their manipulation. And I packed my bags. Not to move in with Thomas, not to make his plan easier. I packed them because I'd remembered something about myself that I'd almost forgotten in the years of being Charles's wife and mother to Daniel, Jacob, and Thomas. I'd remembered that once, a very long time ago, I'd been a young woman named Margaret who'd wanted to teach literature, who'd dreamed of traveling to England to see the places where her favorite poets had lived and written, who'd believed that the world was vast and full of beauty waiting to be discovered. I'd been saving. Not much. But something. A little account Charles had set up for me years ago, money that came from my mother's estate when she passed. I'd never touched it, had let it sit there gathering interest, not really knowing what I was saving it for. Now I knew. The morning I left, I called each of my sons and told them what I was doing. Not asking permission, not explaining beyond the bare facts. I was going to England. I'd be gone for 3 months, maybe longer. The house would be looked after. I'd call when I arrived. That was all. Thomas came over immediately, of course. He stood in my kitchen, in the house he'd been planning to sell, and he cried. Actually cried, tears streaming down his face, and for a moment I wavered. He was still my boy, still the child I'd rocked to sleep and kissed goodnight and loved with every breath in my body. Mom, please, he said. I'm so sorry. I'm as stupid, I'm as greedy, I wasn't thinking. Please don't go. Please don't leave like this. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd once been my baby, and I felt my heart break and heal at the same time. Thomas, I said gently. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not leaving because of what you did. I'm leaving because I finally remembered that I'm allowed to live too. I've spent 73 years being someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. I need to remember how to be Margaret again, just for a little while. He didn't understand. I could see it in his eyes. And maybe that was Kay. Maybe our children aren't meant to understand everything about us. Maybe we're allowed to keep some pieces of ourselves private, sacred, untouchable. But before I left, I asked to see Marcus. Jennifer brought him over, looking ashamed and frightened, and I knelt down, my old knees protesting, and took my grandson's small face in my hands. You were very brave, I told him. That day in the garden, you were so brave to hold my hand when I needed it. Thank you for that, sweet boy. His eyes filled with tears. You're coming back though, right, Grandma? Yes, I promised. I'm coming back. But you know what? When you grow up, when you have choices to make about your life, I want you to remember something. You're allowed to choose yourself sometimes. You're allowed to have dreams that are just yours. You're allowed to say no, even to people you love, especially to people you love, if they're asking you to give up pieces of yourself you're not ready to lose. Can you remember that? He nodded solemnly, like I'd given him some ancient wisdom he needed to protect. I'm writing this now from a small cottage in the Cotswolds, where the light is different than it is at home, softer somehow, like it's filtering through centuries of history. I've walked the paths that Wordsworth walked, stood in the garden where Keats watched his nightingale, sat in the pubs where ordinary people have gathered for hundreds of years to share their stories. And I've learned something. I've learned that love doesn't mean disappearing. It doesn't mean sacrificing every piece of yourself until there's nothing left but the space where you used to be. Real love, the kind worth having, makes room for everyone to grow, even the person doing the loving. Thomas writes to me now. Real letters, on paper, the kind you have to sit down and think about before you write. He's started therapy, he says. He's trying to understand why he thought he could take from me without asking, why he'd stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me only as a resource. Jennifer writes too, apologizing, explaining, promising to do better. I write back because I'm not cruel, because I do still love them, but I'm not in a hurry to come home. Daniel flew out to visit me last month. We walked through Oxford together, and he told me he'd never really understood what I'd given up for them. Not until his new wife started talking about wanting children, and he saw the look in her eyes when she talked about her career, about the choices she'd have to make. We sat in a cafe drinking terrible English coffee, and he cried and apologized, and I held his hand across the table and forgave him, because forgiveness is lighter than anger, and I'm done carrying heavy things. Jacob calls every week now. He asked me what I was doing, really doing, and I told him I was remembering how to be happy. There was a long pause, and then he asked if I could teach him how to do that too. So now we talk, really talk, about life and regret and second chances, and sometimes I think maybe this is what we needed all along, this distance that forced us to see each other clearly again. But it was Marcus's whisper that started it all. That tiny, frightened question in the garden, his small hand in mine, his instinct to hold on when the world was shifting. Children know things we forget as we age. They know that love should feel safe, that home should be a sanctuary, that the people who care for you shouldn't see you as something to be managed or monetized or maneuvered. I'll go home eventually. My house will be waiting, protected by the trust, by the laws, by my own refusal to let it be taken from me. But I'll go home different than I left, carrying with me the weight of this truth. That you can love your children with your whole heart, and still refuse to let them consume you. That you can be a mother and still be a person. That sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people you love is showing them that you matter too. And maybe, just maybe, when Marcus grows up and faces his own moments of choice, his own quiet whispers of doubt, he'll remember his grandmother who heard him that September afternoon, and understood that sometimes love means knowing when to stay, and when to pack your bags, and when to whisper back, I'm not going anywhere. Even as you're already planning your escape to somewhere you can breathe again.